You know, back when I was in the academy, we would follow every toast with a song.
Okay, well, we're going. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Where No BUBS Has Gone Before, a Star Trek The Next Generation podcast hosted by myself, Jay Requard, and my father, Jake Requard. We're recording this for the benefit of my son, Ben, but we know there's so many great Star Trek The Next Generation fans out there that we're recording all of these shows and releasing them for free on YouTube. How are you doing tonight, Jake?
I'm good, Jay. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. We're reviewing the Dauphin, which is Star Trek The Next Generation Season 2, Episode 10, which debuted on
February 20th.
1989.
89, right.
Yeah. So, this is usually one of my skippable episodes. It's not my favorite. I think it's a very flat story with not a lot going on. And today's episode, as you and I have kind of discussed offline, is probably going to be very short. But maybe there's some things in here that would surprise us when we dig into it. But before we begin, I just wanted to ask, I think it's kind of a flat episode. What are your general feelings on it?
I think it's weak. I think it's it would fall into the the 10th percentile, the lowest percentile in terms of having some meat to it and so forth. It's to me it was very much about Wesley's adolescent crush.
Mm-hmm.
There was some there's some interesting things about the difference in the cultures that resulted in the centuries old Civil War. We could talk about that a little bit.
Right.
I think some of the interesting. I thought I didn't put in my notes that since Dr. Crusher, Wesley's mom's there, he can't talk to his mom, so he has to get advice from Worf, who makes him understand that screaming and a la Wolf Klingon mating is not going to work. I thought that
that scene's kind of creepy too, like the look that comes over Michael Jordan's face, it's very uncomfortable.
And then the whole little dramatic scene between Guinan and Riker in 10 Forward was just fun. But Wesley's going like, come on, guys, this is not what I need. Stop play acting and having fun at my expense,
Well, I think a lot of the good parts of this episode happen because of the character interactions.
Yes.
Specifically the one between Riker and Guinan. I think Jonathan Frakes and Whoopi Goldberg just wanted to have a fun scene together, and they got it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think for a lot of fans, when they look at this episode, that scene in general is the most memorable because it's such good dialogue.
Yes.
And I have to say, one person who really pulls her weight, because you're right, we don't have Beverly Crusher here to kind of play the foil to her son in terms of his first affections. But Guinan, played by Whoopi Goldberg, does a really great job here in terms of being able to give an adult voice to some of the things that Wesley's dealing with and some of the difficulties behind it.
Right.
And you kind of go into the episode expecting Riker to be the one to do that, or even Captain Picard, but it really is Wesley who's ultimately turning to Guinan in this episode, and it really is much more of a Whoopi Goldberg episode than I think it is any of the other characters besides Wil Wheaton.
Right, exactly. The other thing that this brings up is the idea of the shapeshifter, the elizomorphs.
Yeah,
which it's kind of it's almost not necessary to, what Wesley's dealing with. It makes it interesting, but in the long term, since shapeshifters play a role in future episodes of Next Generation and other Star Trek spin-offs.
Especially Deep Space Nine.
Right. So it's kind of important that come, and I think there was some of that in the original series. So it's good that they bring that back up and reintroduce the idea that there are these types of beings, and they're very different from what Q does and so forth.
Yeah, they're very different as well from like the changelings in DS9.
Yeah, right.
One thing that I found interesting about the elasmorphs is not only the fact that they take humanoid shape. Actually, before we get into the elasmorphs, let's dig in and give the audience a little rundown about what the Dauphin's actually about.
Sure. Yeah.
So, the Enterprise D is given the task of transporting a young leader of Dalid 4, Celia, and her guardian Anya to their homeworld from their place of exile on Clevdia 3. I think that's how you pronounce it, Clevdia.
Yeah.
So, the homeworld of Dalid 4 has been in civil war for generations, and Celia is expected to bring peace to her troubled planet, which is tidally locked, which means the planet is basically stuck in terms of its rotation, and one side is constantly stuck in daylight, and the other side is constantly stuck in nighttime. And because of this, two separate cultures and, I would argue, probably species have developed, and they're in just constant conflict with each other. And there's this kind of expectation that when Celia shows up, she is going to be the golden child that solves everything. Because let's have a discussion of the allomorphs now, because it's soon going to be revealed that both Celia and her guardian Anya are able to shapeshift, and that when they show up at Dalid 4, they are going to be dealing with a race of shapeshifters, apparently. I think the allomorphs are interesting because when I looked it up on Memory Alpha, the definition was an allomorph or a Dauphin was a vaguely humanoid anthropomorphic shape-shifting species once thought to be only rumor, capable of altering its molecular structure into that of other species. The species was mentioned in the Galactic Zoological Catalog, which is apparently a thing in the Star Trek universe, which I've never heard of, but that's kind of cool and makes sense that they would have one. Unlike the changelings of the Gamma Quadrant, elasmorphs were capable of enjoying the flavors present in foods, required sleep, and can be infected with sicknesses common to other humanoids. I find that interesting because, on one hand, when we talk about anthropomorphic, we're really talking about things that take kind of human quality. So, the elasmorphs, even though they are shapeshifters, and when Wesley is finally shown Celia's true form, which is kind of this nebulous light creature, because he even says at the end of the episode, seeing her on the transport pad, it was like seeing pure light. It seems to me, even though that these creatures are kind of a nebulous energy, they choose to take the form of a humanoid. So, in some ways, I think Memory Alpha is defining them intrinsically as being humanoid. And I was just wondering if you had any reflections on the biological nature of the elasmorphs.
Well, you brought up the one kind of confusing issue that I had is that, you know, Saleya and Anya had these physical manifestation of either humanoids or these scary monsters. And then when she steps onto the transporter pad and shows her true self, and she's like an energy being, light and so forth, it's like, well, that doesn't fit because we've seen other life forms, in Next Generation that are pretty much just energy, organized fields of energy in some sort. So if her natural state is this, pure light, as Wesley describes what he sees, then, why would they choose? I guess it's one of the things where they chose to take on the human form since they were going to travel on the Enterprise, and it would be more comfortable in terms of communicating with a human crew to take on human form.
Well, I think that's a good observation because when you look at their quote unquote bestial form, or the hairy kind of clawed creatures they become, especially Anya. Anya is the main one to transform into that creature. Anya transforms into two versions. There's kind of a short version that's kind of the size of a dwarf.
Yeah, it's like she's like a furry bear or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
My wife Margot remarked, "What's the Ewok doing on the screen?"
Yes, I had that thought too. Yeah.
But then later on in sickbay, when Anya discovers that a sick crew member has been infected by it was there's a androgen encephalitis.
Yes. Right.
The sick patient Hennessy, and detecting that there's a possibility, I guess, of Celia getting infected,
Right.
attempts to kill the crewman and is stopped by Worf and transforms into this much larger, much taller creature than Worf. That is immediately identified in a later conversation to be actually stronger than Worf as well. Um, I think that when we see Celia, that is not the human form that she takes to present to the crew and Wesley is not the form that she's walking around in on I Clav
Clavia 3, or when she gets to
Clavia
the,
3.
or when even she gets to Dalat 4, because I agree, because there was comments made that the environments, the surface environments of the two planets were similar, and that they were, there wasn't any details, but they weren't very hospitable environments.
So the interesting thing is that they also talk about Celia's like biological origins, where her parents were members of the two civilizations on Dalid 4, and that they both died before she was of age to know them, I guess.
Mhm.
But I think it's the understanding that like her ability to transform will allow her to, I guess, walk in the two different climates, or be able to communicate or understand or be perceived by the two different cultures. So I'm wondering if like the entire planet of Dalid 4 is full of elasmorphs, but they're elasmorphs that can only take one unique shape, and that Celia is unique in the fact that she can take two different shapes. Like maybe she can take a human shape and then transform into the light version of the elasmorph, where Anya can only turn into the hairy monster. She can't actually turn into the light one.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of quote what Picard does at times, it says, "Well, until we have more information or more data, that we can only speculate." But that's good speculation. But the key thing is we don't know what the actual, hostile quote unquote environments are on these planets.
Right, and of course it's science fiction.
It's
Um,
science fiction, right?
so one thing that Worf actually brings up, and I think it's interesting talking about the relationship between Wesley and Celia, because despite it being kind of a dopey little romance, well, I won't say dopey. Like it's just very childlike.
It
Um,
is.
one thing that Worf says early on when they talk about the mission is that they make some suggestion about bodies, or like, and Worf says bodies are only shells. And I think that is kind of a good piece of dialogue that folds into what this story is actually about. Wesley falls in love with this girl that he thinks is a humanoid, but he later finds out that she is actually this kind of amorphous creature of light that but could also turn into the strange hairy beast monster. And I think he's confronted with the difficulty that I think if we were to move into space and we were to meet different civilizations and different that were populated by different species, I think that there would actually be some sort of mental and emotional hurdle over the idea of a human loving a different species of life or a different life form, and that the difficulty of. And I think there's a scene where um, he even questions Leo, like, could you really love me being what you are versus what I am? Because he feels a little bit lied to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for Celia, the ability to change her form and kind of decide her own body, there's no question about her loving Wesley, because for her, loving Wesley is about loving Wesley as who he is, versus Wesley having this kind of preconceived notion of what he thought she was versus what she actually is. And it gets to something that Troy says. Um, Troy detects that the visitors are not what they present. They are what they say they are, but they aren't what they say they are.
Correct. Yes.
And I think that this is a very interesting conversation to have in this era where we're talking about the transgender community having more rights and representation, and also talking about how, Ben is going to go out into the world and he's going to meet different people of different orientations, different gender identities, different sexual orientations, and just different lifestyles. And he's going to have to make the decision at some point, like, who he wants to spend his life with, if he wants to spend his life with anyone, which, there's people who decide not to now, and that's a different conversation for something else. But, you know, I think the beauty of Star Trek is that Roddenberry has always pushed, and the writers have always pushed this idea of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And I think one of the important things they push in that idea is that love comes in infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And that if you can look beyond people's forms and their appearances and love them for who they are, you're actually evolving to something bigger and better than what you were previously. I think the big leap for Wesley in this story is not the fact that he falls in love with a girl, but the story is about him being able to fall in love with this person that he's found for who she is, not what he perceives her to be.
I don't know if he gets that, but you bring up a good point because he does not. He's Wesley is not a changeling. He's not an elasmomorph where she is. So we don't know what experiences. I mean, Saleya, since she's been isolated on this planet, she's learned a lot. So she knows about there's different species and they're different physically and they're different culturally and so forth. So, and the fact that she can change her form, she is kind of pre-programmed to be able to understand, accept, and respect different beings, different life forms.
Absolutely.
Just what you said about what's happening today in society, where people are being and people are changing. It used to be that 40 years ago, well, hell, 70 years ago, it was still against the law in many states, such as Virginia, that you couldn't have people of different races marry.
Yeah.
Now, nobody, really has problems with that. Very few people. The same thing with same-sex
Very
marriage.
few people publicly.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, there's even polls indicate that majority of Americans accept
Right.
um, same-sex marriage. They may not agree with it per se, but they accept it. That it's going to happen and so forth.
Right.
So that Saleya comes from that experience where Wesley, since he's got a fixed form, has a little bit more a challenge, understanding that. But I think that is a lesson with time that he could possibly get. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also interesting because we've discussed Roddenberry's kind of focus on sex sometimes in the
Right.
show, and
Right.
the first season is very salacious in terms of its presentation sometimes, but so far season 2 has been very muted in terms of the discussion of actual sexuality, and even when it's discussed here, Data brings up um, David even makes the line, judging by her appearance, it's likely you and Celia are biologically compatible. Of course, there could be a difference in the histocompatibility complex in the cell membrane,
Right.
but Data,
Right.
I want to meet her, not dissect her, which is
Yes,
a great line.
it is.
You know, I think what you see different characters be able to accept different relationships and enter different relationships. I know in a future episode, we will be dealing with the question of gender in terms of its relationship to society, and I think it's a Riker episode. But there's also, like, Tasha Yar sleeping with Data, which we talked about last episode in The Measure of a Man, but also previously on The Naked Now.
Mm-hmm.
We're entering a phase of human history where the idea of having intimate relationships with technological devices or even beings or intelligence is not far-fetched. So the idea of what love is and what a permissible or good relationship is constantly going to be shifting and has constantly been shifting with the times, as you mentioned. But I think the one thing that Star Trek is probably preparing us for, I know it's helped me prepare for it, and I hope it'll help Ben in a bit of ways, but like the question of how to love and who to love and what to love is really going to change a lot in the next century. And even by the time I'm dead and by the time Ben's dead, I think the definitions will be wholly different, especially with things like augmented reality, AI. Um, just it's kind of taboo to talk about, but um, Japan and Asia really are producing these sex robots now that are incredibly lifelike, and they really do have a huge audience. So the question, what happens when you actually make a cybernetic being that you can actually have as a partner one day, not only for sex, but maybe even for life? They play with the idea in Voyager later on when the EMH is actually able to go out in society and be a quote unquote person, which he is. He's human too, but he enters a relationship with a biological woman, and no one blinks an eye. I think a lot of the things we deal with now in society when it comes to gender and sexuality, and especially relationships, um, in terms of the infinite diversity and infinite combinations we're now discovering in my generation, um, I think that the humans of the future really are far more progressive and less puritanical than we are. And it's actually something I wanted to talk to you about. Um, Anya really has this puritanical attitude when it comes to who Celia can see, who Celia can interact with, and what Celia can do. Not only because there's this idea that Celia is destined to bring peace to their species, but it's kind of bred into their culture too. This kind of isolationism and this kind of puritanism.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about gender and sex and all these things, I think when we talk about it in an American context, we often leave out the fact that much of this country's origins were Puritan in nature. And that Puritanism, I think, still infects our culture in many ways.
Yes.
Just even the fact that we're talking about things that are taboo, I think, is a reflection of that. And I was just wondering what you thought about America's continuing, or our culture's continuing Puritanism, and having grown up, you were born in 52. Um, Having grown up to where you are now, what do you think of our culture from where you grew up to where it is now in terms of how puritanical we are? Are we more puritanical? Are we less? Is that good? Is that bad? What do you think?
Well, I think, I mean, this is a challenging question, and I haven't had time to think about it, but off the top of my head, I think that uh,
Got you
great,
good.
the great schism we have in our society now, particularly looking at people that are progressive or have a
Mm-hmm.
tendency toward being progressive, and those that are conservative and are actually resistant to change and resistant to accepting that, yeah, systematic racism has existed in our culture, that even if beyond Puritanism, that those European religions actually condoned slavery, treating other human beings as property, and supported colonialism, European colonialism, to some degree American colonialism that had adverse effects on other peoples. That I think that there's a real struggle, conflict now, push and pull. I mean, you address this where you think things will go during, as you grow older and as Ben grows up, that there's going to be a natural movement toward more acceptance of diversity and to actually celebrate that diversity. So I think that some of the conservatism, and it's almost like conservatism, social and political conservatism, as I have come to construe it in this country at this time, is anti-progress. Is just it's not conservatism. It's not wanting any change. And I think Puritanism locks things in that there's a certain way to behave, and that's the only way to behave. And it's a theme that comes up in our discussions a lot. What Star Trek represents and points out that humans as individuals, humans as a society, humans as our various diverse cultures evolve. And you have to accept that they are evolving. And you can put some brakes on it, you can discuss it, but I think there's a lot of people that, and Puritanism kind of reinforces this, they just don't want to change, period.
Well,
some of it's selfish, some of it's from an economic standpoint, it's from a power politics standpoint, from its an unacknowledged caste system.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, so I think everything that you just said is 100% spot on. The thing that I would like to add to that, especially your comment on caste, which I think is something we really don't talk about in our current modern society enough. And I think it actually applies to this because it seems like there's some sort of caste system at play between Celia and Anya, in terms of Anya having a distinct role that she serves, and then is actually done serving the moment she delivers Celia to Dalid 4.
Yeah.
Which is very much a caste-like role. I think what you said about the Puritanism keeping things in a certain static position, especially when it comes to how you live, how you see things, and how you do things within a culture and a society. I think the problem that we're discovering now in 2021, and have been discovering for about the last 10 years, when a lot of this discussion about social and economic justice really got started. And I think a lot of it really got started around 2008, in terms of that being a novel crisis that kind of shot everything up. I think what we're discovering is that so many people were already living internally with these different sorts of diverse identities and lifestyles and ideas and thoughts in their head about who they were and wanted to be. And I think what the dangerous thing about the Puritanism that you pointed out, it's not only that it's static, but it covers up the truth. It restricts everything to this one viewpoint, that it's kind of like putting blinders on a horse. The horse can only see forward, but the horse can't see the rest of the world. And Puritanism is basically the acceptance of outright ignorance. And I think that's the most dangerous thing about it. It's ignorance of a different person. It's the continuation of the othering for the sake of a false sense of security. Because you mentioned a lot of, you broke it down well in terms of culture and society, but one thing that I think that we often leave out is species. Species have to evolve or die, and the moment you stop evolving, your only other choice is what the only other choice is. You're dead. Like, you really do have to keep changing, or else, that's it. Puritanism is dangerous because at some point it presupposes that it's never going to need to change. So something's going to come along anyway and kill it. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of, and you mentioned conservatism, especially here in America, and you know, conservatives who are listening to the show, I don't want you to think that Jake and I are automatically picking on you, but there's a lot of things that conservatism, especially the neoliberal version, has picked up since the end of the Goldwater era that I don't think even conservatives agree are part of their moral and ethical identity. Both Jake and I talk to Republicans all the time who don't agree with their own side of the political aisle in terms of what they do, just as, I and Jake many times don't agree with what our side of the political aisle does. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that, and I think the left is guilty of this too. I think Puritanism is built out of this old religious idea of fear that if you don't follow this specific thing, something is going to come and punish you for it. But the thing that I always pose to that, quandary that Puritanism puts in place, that if we don't do things a certain way, we will be punished. When and by who? And it's not, and people, well, like, I want to bring this up because one thing that happened in 2011, I'm not 2011, one thing that happened during 9/11, which was a really politically galvanizing moment for me, I think it was Jerry Falwell. Yeah, I think it was Jerry Falwell. He came out and said the reason 9/11 happened is because American had been fostering homosexuality and the pagans and Islam and all these things. And the truth is, the ultimate truth is, if you're scientifically minded, if you're rationally minded, if you're in the mindset of the people in the Federation in the 24th century, you know that the reason natural disasters or terrorist attacks happen isn't because people are gay or because people have a certain religion. It's because people are exerting power through violence.
There were people on the religious right back in the 80s who felt that the HIV epidemic came on because God was punishing gays.
Which is the farthest thing of the truth. It was a genetic mutation that unfortunately spread to humans.
It was a virus that made a jump probably from monkeys at some point in Africa and got into the human species. Right.
Yeah, but like that isn't an act of God. That is just a genetic mutation that happens sometime within nature. Ascribing that to the idea that somehow you not following a certain life path or a lifestyle is the cause of that
Well, but
is basic Puritanism at its
and
finest.
some people would say, and this is kind of off target, but say, well, God works in mysterious ways. However, coming back to Puritanism, one thing you picked up on is, I think, and it goes back before Puritanism. It goes back to Luther, and as Christianity developed, specifically probably in the Dark Ages. And I don't know why I think about this, but we've talked about this before, that there used to not be 1700 years ago a big concern about hell
No,
and hell as punishment, and that if you don't do this, if you don't do that, you're going to be damned. I mean, I had one individual who has a strong Christian faith basically say that if you don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God and you don't accept him and you don't acknowledge God in that way, you will be punished. And it's like, no, don't tell me that some person who lives in New Guinea who's never heard of Jesus Christ is going to be punished when he dies.
yeah,
That's just not logical at all.
well, it's an assumption that there is a force in this universe that is simply sitting around waiting to fuck you up for a set of integers that you have nothing about and that you were given no warning about upon your birth. I mean, if that is the case, the problem with Puritanism ultimately for me is that it's the outright acceptance of tyranny for the sake of order. Like, ultimately, Puritanism is a form of tyranny. And I think that's why if you're conservative or liberal, progressive or, I guess, traditionalist, um, Puritanism should actually be the last thing that you try to embrace in any sense of the word, because it ultimately ends, like we've pointed out, in death. You have to be able to change and accept new information and new inputs and new viewpoints if you want to keep progressing and keep growing as an individual. And I think that's something that we see Wesley do here. If I can get us back to the episode.
Well, let's see what happens at the end of the month when John Podesta's dream comes true, and there's more information coming out from the government by pushing the Freedom of Information Act to see what the government says about UAPs/UFOs.
Well, okay. I have to ask you about that, and I think this fits into the episode because we're kind of at the end here, and we'll leave it here. Let's say the government comes out and actually confirms the existence of extraterrestrials, and let's go even farther. Let's say a lot of these conspiracies that we've heard about the government behind the scenes working with certain extraterrestrial races or species, let's say we're introduced. How would you feel 20 years from now, of, let's say, your great grandchild marrying a little gray man and like moving to his planet out, beyond the solar system?
If
Or
that happened,
them moving here next door,
um,
or them having children if they could have children.
just on the surface, with not having ever thought about that actual scenario, I think I'd have to accept it.
Right? See it, but you had to stop and think about it because the possibility of that is actually there. And I think it's human within us to be concerned a little bit about those things. But again, it's the beauty of things like Star Wars that show. Not Star Wars, Star Trek. Ugh, never Star Wars, folks.
Never Star
That
Wars, right?
that's fascism.
That's right.
um, but the beauty of Star Trek, I think, is that it shows us to push beyond that kind of fear and that kind of trepidation, and really end the othering. Because you know,
Yes.
if you really believe what Carl Sagan and a lot of these great cosmologists of our time believe, everything around us is made of star stuff. We were all forged within the crucibles of gravity and light and energy and
Right.
heat, all coming together and then exploding outward. We're all part of the universe.
When you use the term othering, I don't think we talked about this on the podcast. That there was a National Geographic program exercise where they wanted people to just think about racism and how they define their thoughts on race. And it was everybody had to write 6 words as to
Hmm.
how you felt. And I think, mine were, let's see. Yeah, mine was, I am not afraid of the others.
Yeah.
Because when I was growing up in Baltimore in the 50s, not from my parents, but from people in the neighborhood,
Right.
other kids, I was taught to fear black people.
All right. Well, like all anything that I learned in terms of racism, I didn't actually learn from you and mom ever, to my knowledge. I mean, I learned some racism from granddaddy, but I I think granddaddy's, and we're talking about your dad, but I
Mm-hmm.
think granddaddy's racism was as much generational
Oh,
as it.
certainly. Right.
Well, like, I think going through World War II, and there's a very interesting dichotomy there, I think, between his generation and like Asians. And especially like Granddaddy and I never had the talk about how he really felt about being German after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you ever had that discussion with him.
Not really, no. We never
But
did.
I have to imagine that if you were German American, before the Bund and after the Bund, you have to feel very weird about it. Just like if you were a German in
Well,
Germany
my
before Hitler and after Hitler, it
Your
has to feel weird.
your great grandfather John Jacob Reckford Sr. grew up, had a father. He spoke German when he grew up. He was born in 1892,
Right.
and he dropped the Reckford, the T off the end. DT is very German. He dropped the T off during World War One because it made Reckford sound more French because it is Alsatian French,
Hmm.
so that he didn't, the DT was a marker that, oh, you're a German, and a lot of people didn't like Germans back during World War One.
Right. So I think generationally, in terms of what we accept and what we find different in terms of the other changes, um, and I think things are getting better. But I think the idea of what happens at the end of the month, John Podesta gets his way, and suddenly aliens are a thing,
Mm-hmm.
really puts that question into a very different sort of context. Because we've been dealing with racism on an interspecies level in terms of humanity. What does racism look like when we actually have to deal with it on an intergalactic or
in
interstellar level?
in an interspecies instead of intraspecies. Yes,
Yes. Sorry, intraspecies. Sorry,
yes.
it's but
One of the things I don't think we talked about in the podcast. I read a book about how presidents have had discussions with different alien races and actually treaties and so forth. And
right.
one of the original things is that as Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Churchill were very close during World War II, and they were both aware of the Foo Fighters, these funny
Yeah.
UFOs that would show up in the sky over the U.S. and Europe in combat areas. Churchill, allegedly, this is all
Yeah.
circumstantial and it's questionable in terms of the
Well, let's
documentation.
frame this like you're reading some you're reading some books now about possible UFO history behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
And one of the things that Churchill said to Roosevelt says, look, I don't think we should, if we think that these are something we don't understand and they're from, outside the earth, we should not tell the public about it because Churchill said it will destroy the church.
Oh yeah. Well, it's such a fascinating view that Churchill had that it would destroy the church, because I think what he was referring to at the time is probably the Church of England, because Churchill a Catholic?
No, he was Church of England, but I think he
Yeah.
was just talking about, he was looking at from a narrow Englishman standpoint that it would destroy not only
Oh
the
right.
Church of England, but Christianity and actually religion in general.
Oh, I think that at that time, I think he was right, but I think at the time, not only would it destroy Christianity, I think that would probably destroy, at the time, would have destroyed every government.
That's what he was concerned about. Yeah.
Well, especially like post World War II, if you think about it, I think one thing that our leaders are good. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Sorry, folks. Blah. I think one thing that our current crop of leaders are very good at, whether it's for good or for evil, is that they're able to take the temperature of society and kind of know what our response would be, which is good if you have leaders that care for us. But if you have politicians that want to manipulate us, that's a really bad skill for us for them to have. Um,
The good politicians need to have something, the German word called Fingerspitzengefühl.
and what does that mean?
It means basically wetting your finger and putting it in the air and know what is going on.
Well, okay, for you,
It's
what your
it's really a term for situational awareness.
okay? So addressing your before we go, because we're done talking about the Dauphin, and
Yes.
it's an okay episode. Um, Wil Wheaton actually does a good job. I think great acting
Yes. Yeah.
and really good stuff with Guinan, Whoopi Goldberg,
Yes.
but
Yes.
otherwise a flat episode.
Yes.
Um, Here's what we will end it on. Put it, wetting your finger and putting it into the wind. Um, how do you think society will react if UFOs are confirmed? Just your view. Like, how do you think in June of 2021 if suddenly the U.S. government comes out and the EU comes out and says, "Hey, extraterrestrials are a real thing. We've been working for them for 40 to 50 years, since World War II or before that." What do you think the general reaction would be?
Well, I think that they've already said, we've talked about this, are they preparing for some larger announcement? But they've said, look, these things are real. We don't know what they are. We don't know whether they're extraterrestrial. We don't know where they come from. So that's okay. That makes sense. If they go beyond that and say, these really are, other from other civilizations, that
Mm-hmm.
that we'll have to wait and see. It depends on how much they say, and I think it will have to sink in. I was talking to somebody explaining this book I read and what it implied, and posed the scenario that you just put forth. And the answer was, I don't think I can get my head around that. And I said, that's exactly why the governments have, if they know, if they've had actual alien contact, why they've decided we're not going to tell the public this because they can't get their head around it.
Why do you
Because
think they would be willing to do it now then?
I don't know. The only thing is that one of the things that it goes back to Ronald Reagan in a comments at the General Assembly of the United Nations
Right.
saying that, if we had some threat from, an alien race, wouldn't that pull us together? And there's enough shit that we pull on each other right now, whether it's in this country or in Europe or in the globe in general, that it's just like, COVID-19 should have been something that pulled the world together. And, we're slowly getting there by, realizing that with this Delta variant, it's not over with. There's going to be future surges. It's important that effective viruses get everywhere and so forth.
Oh yeah.
But I think that if you had, if you just get people to realize that we're not the only ones, I think and if they don't say that there's a national security threat or a world security threat,
Mm.
if they said that, then it's going to scare people. If they just say, look, we really think these are alien and we're not alone, and it's presented in a benign manner, it'll take a little while to sink in, I think. And,
I
and, and I don't know what the changes will be then, because if you present it as a threat, that might pull people together better, but at the same time, there's the chance that people would just go
fuck it.
batshit.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So, wow, you put forth a lot of scenarios I actually hadn't thought about before. So, I think the first one of them coming out and just saying we know that they're extraterrestrials, I think you're right. Like, it would slowly settle in upon us. But, going off the idea that Churchill and Roosevelt and our governments had been in contact with these aliens, let's suppose that that's the case, and we're in contact with these aliens, and at the end of the month, let's just say at the end of the month, um, Joe Biden gets up and like, this is Kleeglorp from the planet Exelon 5, and he helped us figure out microwaves. Um, I think there's one of two things that they would do if they were to go that far. I think that they would come out and say, like, look, the planet's gotten to this point, our culture's gotten to this point, we need help, and it's time for us to stop bullshitting you. Here are these aliens that have basically been feeding us technology over the years. They realize that we have a problem. We definitely have a problem, so we are now entering some sort of alliance with this alien species. I think if they presented it that way, that would probably be good, because it would be like, oh, it's an alliance. We're not getting fucked in this. Um, there was one, and this is just from my own reading in terms of UFOs and the kind of idea that they've been connected to our government. During World War II, there was a concern that like there were good aliens that our side, the Allies, were in contact with, but there were bad aliens on that Hitler was in contact with. One worry that I've always imagined, that I'm imagining now since you brought it up, is that like they come out and say, look, here are these aliens we've been working with, and we're about to go to war with them because there's this huge hostile alien force heading towards our solar system and heading towards their solar system at the same time. And if we don't pull together, we're fucked. It's Independence Day, kids, and, and like here's our Will Smith in alien form.
We'll just have to see. We'll just have to see what. Yeah.
Otherwise, I would think that you would have to answer a lot of like everyone is going to have to form some sort of response immediately, especially the religious organizations. Even if they come out and say, basically, we know these are extraterrestrials, but we've had no contact with them, Pope Francis is still going to have to wake up the next moment and be like, well, I guess I'm going to have to sit on this fucking chair and tell me what, have God whisper in my ear something to say now, because what do I say? I think everyone is going to have to go through that, no matter what sort of statement it is. I think if it is as far as we've been in contact and we have a relationship with these people or these aliens, the immediate thing that the government could do to put everyone at ease is demonstrate immediate benefit. Like, okay, the Vulcans land in first contact because they pick up the warp trail from Zephyr and Cochrane's Phoenix 1. One thing that the Vulcans start helping us do is, and they do it in a kind of shitty way, but help us get to Warp 5. And that's, the prequel to Enterprise in Jonathan Archer's mission. One thing that I could definitely see them coming out and doing and saying, like, hey, here's a piece of medical technology that you've never seen before, but no one ever has cancer again. Because we never really got an explanation in Star Trek of where they got the medical technology to do away with things like cancers and brain tumor. They even say at one point, like, acute heart disease is, a trifle for us to deal with. If I was an alien civilization coming to Earth, and I was trying to make peace with these humans that, have guns and shit and will shoot down our flying saucer. Cletus is going to shoot down our flying saucer over Mississippi. I think the best thing I could do is, like, show Cletus, hey, you know how your mama has cancer? Let me fix your mama's cancer. I think it has to be something on that level.
Well, maybe we should end it here. I think that because you have a lot of people have these puritanical fixed engrams and the way they think, they're going to see them as the other, and they're going to be bad. They're going to be bad.
Well, I think getting to that Puritanism for a second, I think the way you defeat that Puritanism, because if Puritanism is fear of the reprisal because of deviation, I think that you show them immediately that if you deviate here and right now, the benefits are immediate and obvious. I think the way you defeat Puritanism is by showing people that the immediate off-road to it is far worth whatever staying on that route is. And I think aliens could be a part of doing that. I think in many ways, and first, I know we're still talking about Star Trek here, but I think one of the things that isn't really covered well in the First Contact film is that World War III just happened. So a lot of Earth is still kind of fragmented and there's no unified governments. It really isn't until the Vulcans come down and make contact that we get our shit together. And it isn't just because, like, we're scared of the Vulcans. It's also because, like, hey guys, we now have this opportunity that they're offering us.
It gives everyone on Earth a totally different perspective.
And if we are already working with these aliens behind the scenes, that means that these aliens are willing to work with us. So they're essentially Vulcans in a sense already, that they're willing to develop something with us going into the future in terms of a relationship. That should be seen as a good thing versus what, I think Stephen Hawking was right about the other end of things. Stephen Hawking was a big proponent that if we see aliens, it was going to be a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
If any of these conspiracies about the government working with aliens behind our backs are true, thank God it's a good thing. That means these aliens are willing to do work versus what Hawking said, which looks a lot like Independence Day.
They don't sound like they're colonialist.
True, and that's another important thing. Like, I think it was the second to last episode of season 1 of Star Trek where Starfleet was being taken over by those bug creatures that
Oh
were
yeah,
burrowing into the
yeah.
spot, the
Uh-huh.
brainstem. You know, it doesn't seem like we have bugs on our brainstem yet either. So I think we're going to be okay. um, but on that, let's end it here. Dad, thank you
Okay.
so much for joining us.
Thanks,
We will
Jay.
see everyone again next time for here. Let me bring up the.
Contagion, isn't it?
Oh, right, we're doing Contagion with the Iconians.
Yeah, with the
Oh,
Iconians.
and the Enterprise's sister ship, the Yamato.
Yamato, yes.
So
right.
we'll see everyone next time for Star Trek Season 2, Episode 11, Contagion. See you later, Dad.
Thanks, Jay. Bye-bye.
Bye.